Welcome back to The Source. The biggest news from Queen's Park is nothing to do with COVID today. It's the fact that West Niagara MPP Sam Oosterhoff and his wife welcomed a bouncing baby boy just recently, just last week. Congratulations from all of us here at YourTV Niagara, Sam.
Thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate that.
So his name is Solomon. He's a big boy. Everything's going well?
Sullivan, yeah. Sullivan. John. Yes, Sullivan. And everything is going very well with both him and with Mother. We're very excited and blessed.
Well, let's get to the business at hand today. An announcement earlier this week about some great sums of money coming to the Niagara area for infrastructure.
So $9.6 million announced through the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund, which is vital money for our local municipalities, which have obviously faced a great deal of challenges. Niagara is an enormous geographical region, and we want to ensure that the infrastructure that is necessary is there to ensure that our roads, our bridges, our wastewater and treatment is up to snuff, and that's exactly what this funding will help support.
Sam, let's turn our attention to schools across the province. Some school boards were able to reopen. Niagara schools remain closed. What has to happen for Niagara schools to reopen, and when might we see the doors open?
The determination of whether or not schools can open is really a factor of what the transmission in the community is in that particular region. So on Monday, 7 boards opened up across the province, approximately 100,000 students. There will be more boards in the following weeks, but every week we take the advice of the Chief Medical Officer of Health, who's looking at determinations around case incidence rates, around cases per 100,000, as well as, of course, the transmission and percent positivity rate. So there's a number of different factors that come into play. And I know everyone wants to have the exact date that Niagara will be able to go back. But the reality is we have to wait until we get those recommendations from the Chief Medical Officer of Health before we can make those announcements. Ontario has a very robust school reopening plan. Over $1.6 billion has been invested in everything from ventilation to masking to protocols to over 3,000 new teachers being hired, 600 public health nurses for our schools, asymptomatic testing, and of course, online supports for those who don't wish to send their children back. So no one has to send their child to class if they want to pursue online learning, but we want to ensure that when safe, and again, based off of that expert advice, students can return to class.
The situation is really dire in long-term care homes right now, and that tends to soak up a lot of the press coverage right now with a lot of deaths. What is being done? What is being planned for the future? Is Bill 203 something that the province is considering? And do you think that will pass? What is the situation looking forward in the long-term care homes?
Yeah, so first of all, my heart goes out to those families who have been impacted by COVID-19, especially those who have lost loved ones. I've had a couple of extended family members, a great aunt and a great uncle, pass away from COVID-19. It's a very real disease and impacting people in very drastic ways. So first of all, my thoughts and prayers go to those families and to our staff who are working in long-term care, and of course the residents. The good news is that all Niagara long-term care homes have been vaccinated, which is fantastic. My understanding is upwards of 7,000 residents and over 1,800 staff, if my numbers are correct as of yesterday, have been vaccinated, which is obviously good news. But there's more that needs to be done, and we're working to ensure that we're accessing as many vaccines as possible for Niagara and other regions across the province that obviously need to ensure that their vaccines are going to the most vulnerable. But our budget announced last fall invested incredible amounts in long-term care, hundreds of millions of dollars. In fact, the budget also announced that we're going to be providing direct 4 hours of care for every resident in long-term care, which is an enormous investment of over $2 billion in order to ensure that that happens and our seniors and loved ones in long-term care are being taken care of.
You mentioned vaccinations, and there was some controversy here in Niagara about whether or not the Moderna vaccine that was slated for Niagara was rerouted somewhere else. Is that the case? And when will we see the vaccines coming back to Niagara? We only had vaccines for a week.
Well, my understanding is, again, that the COVID-19 command table working with the vaccination task force headed up by General Rick Hillier. So it's not politicians who run the task force. It's based off of ethical guidance from bioethicists from the University of Ottawa, and of course the guidance of that task force. make determinations about where particular allocations of vaccinations are going at a particular date. So I know there's been a lot of conversation about one particular batch of vaccines, but I think it's also important to look at the fact that there have been thousands and thousands of vaccines received. In fact, I know 14 out of the 32 public health regions in Ontario have not received a single vaccine. And Niagara has, of course, seen our entire long-term care home system vaccinated, as well as many others in supporting roles. So there's obviously always more need for vaccine. We've called on the federal government to expedite those shipments of Pfizer. Premier Ford picked up the phone, called the CEO of Pfizer and said, what's going on? We have capacity to administer 40,000 vaccines in Ontario. We're administering, I believe, only right now about a quarter of that, but that's not because we don't want to. It's because we don't have vaccines to administer. And so those determinations are continuing to be made by that command table and that task force, but I'm going to keep making sure that Niagara's voice is heard when it comes to our need.